There is a disease in the world today, and it's been since the beginning of time. We all, maybe at some point in time, will experience this disease in our life. Maybe for the man who walks in his garage and sees his car, who is less than 2 years old, says, "I need to trade." Maybe for the woman who walks in her garage, her closet, and sees a closet full of clothes and looks and says to herself, "I have nothing to wear." Maybe it's for the person who goes on their job and shows up every Monday morning through Friday and does their job as they should and then says, "Nobody appreciates me." Maybe it's for the person in school who finds himself maybe not always the teacher's pet. And they say, "Why can't I be first sometime?" The disease we're talking about is the disease of discontentment. Sometimes in our life, we all struggle with it, don't we? We have a hard time finding contentment, not contempt, but contentment in our life. Learning to be content is something that is not easy. As a matter of fact, it is a learned behavior. It's not something that automatically comes natural to us. Sometimes we find that we feel like we're being passed over or we're being overlooked or whatever the case may be. I'm thankful for people, as I mentioned earlier today, as we think about Memorial Day, where people didn't simply say, "It's all about me." But what I do, regardless if it means paying the supreme sacrifice, is more about our God and our country. Amen? He provided an opportunity for us to be here today. You know, we learned a lot of time early on how to be discontent. When I was a boy, I used to go and during the summertime and on my breaks, and I would spend a week or so or a couple of weeks during the summer with my mom's mom in Kinston, North Carolina. Now, one thing that my grandmother Davis did was that she would do most of her shopping, as maybe you have done, through catalogs, J.C. Penney, Sears, those kind of things. Catalog stores learned early on how to teach people how to be discontent. You see, that's what marketing does. It teaches you not to be content with what you have and to learn to be discontent, so you'll need something else. So, therefore, a catalog shopper may look at something and decide that they just cannot live without this item that they're looking at that they didn't even know existed just 2 minutes ago. You see, that's discontentment, isn't it? And sometimes we do that as we take it the next step further. Maybe we look at our cars and we say, "I need another car." Maybe we look at a home and we say, "I need another home." Maybe we learn in our relationships early on that this doesn't meet my needs anymore. I'm not happy with this relationship. Whatever the case be, it leads to discontentment. Marilyn Monroe was one of the biggest stars of her era and still known today as one of the most iconic movie stars there ever was. And yet Marilyn Monroe was a person who died by her own hand. Maybe if there had been one more movie or one more magazine cover or one more important man in the world to show her some attention, maybe then she could be content. You see, women envied her and men desired her. Yet with that, she still could not find contentment in her own life. And so I want to this morning look at Paul, the Apostle Paul, and his life from Philippians chapter 4. And we have to realize that Paul, when he writes to the Philippian letter to the church at Philippi, that he is writing from prison. Now, I want you to read with me Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 and following, down to 13. Paul says this, and remember, he's writing from prison. "I rejoice greatly in the Lord. At last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content." What? in whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have, underlined these words, learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, you've probably heard that last verse, countless times in your life. You've heard sermons preached on it. You've heard people walk around doing something. Maybe they're working and doing a certain job, and they're just about to give out. And they say, well, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Or they're running a marathon, or whatever the case may be. But Paul says what? I can do everything because of what Christ has done. And it wasn't because I want to run out there and see if I can jump off the top of this building and land on my feet. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But he says, I've learned to be content with where God has placed me. Follow along with me then this morning. We need to understand that if we're going to learn how to be content and live with a content mindset in our life, that we need what? To resist comparisons. You know that's where it comes from? You open that Sears catalog and maybe you've got a favorite shirt that you always wear. And all of a sudden you said, this is my favorite shirt. I love this shirt. It's my favorite color. It has the best material. It does just like I want it to. It doesn't wrinkle bad. Whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden there's this advertisement. And there's another shirt with a color you have hardly ever seen before. And it says, never needs ironing, or hardly ever needs washing, or whatever the case. And all of a sudden, you need a new favorite shirt. Huh? You see, we learn to be discontent through those things, but we also need to learn how to resist comparisons. When Paul's writing this letter to the church at Philippi, you know what it's called? Remember, he's writing from jail. The Epistle of Joy. If anybody ever had a reason not to be happy, it should be Paul. He should be not happy that he's locked up in jail. He should be very saddened that he's looking around and watching other preachers maybe running around saying they would be able to preach, and yet he's locked up for preaching Jesus, the very thing that they're doing. Or maybe he sees the guards in the palace guard and how they're able to come and go every day on their own, and he's like, man, I just envy their freedom. But Paul says, I have learned to be happy no matter what the situation. He did not learn to get bogged. He learned not to get bogged down in making comparisons with himself and his situation with others' situation. We love to make comparisons with others, though, don't we? We look at their cars, we look at their homes, we look at the things that they may have, and maybe they've got better talents than we have, and then we begin to look and we start to compare ourselves to them. And we always try to diminish what God has blessed them with by saying that they must have not attained it by the right way. But the truth of the matter is, people work hard for what they have for the most part. And some people are more naturally gifted in certain areas of life than I am. Some people have more hair than I have. That's just the way it works. Steve's like, yeah, I got a lot more hair than you got. You see, that's just the way things are. And so if I learn to be discontent with what I have or I don't have, I could spend my whole life miserable. But if I learn to be content with where God has placed me and to use the things that God has given me in my life and the circumstances there as well for His glory, then I know what contentment really is. You see, we can choose, can't we, where we are and the decisions we make in our life. Perhaps rather than looking at the guy that has the fancy home, longing and thinking how we would like to have it, maybe need one or to look like that as ourselves, maybe we need to just be thankful for where we are. Look down the road at the people who don't have anything. Isn't it amazing that we like to make comparisons and we always compare up unless we are comparing sin? Huh? If I'm driving this kind of car, then I see that kind of car, and I wish I had that. But what about when it comes to sin? You know, when we look at sins, we always do what? if I have this item in my hand, I've got a, back in the day, I think I paid $80 for my wedding band. And I thought that was a lot of money. And now, for probably the same amount of gold, it could cost $300-400 for that same ring. But I saw some that were 2 and 3 times as wide as the one that I wear. And they were gold, had a higher concentration of gold. You know how gold goes, 10 karat, 14, whatever how it goes, 22, 24. And so mine is not 22 or 24 karat gold. You know? And so, but I could often say, well, I wish I'd had this, or I wish I'd had that. But you know the biggest thing that it symbolizes to me? That I love the woman that God gave me in my life. And it's a constant reminder that I don't need to compare this ring to someone else's to be reminded of how blessed I am in my life with the woman God gave me. What about you? What do you spend your time comparing in your life? You see, you can compare yourself with circumstances or things around you, or you could look at the circumstances in your life. Do you realize there's always going to be some type of circumstance that takes place in your life? You have no choice in that, do you? But you do have a choice in the way you will respond to it. Secondly, contentment comes from within. You know, we need to be able to resist comparisons, and we need to understand that our contentment comes from within. It's not going to happen when we pick up another car or another this item or that item, or I this or I that. It's going to come when we realize that, God, where you have placed me and what you've given me, I can live with that. When the Apostle Paul was there in the prison, what does he say? I have learned to be content in all situations with whatever I've got, whether well-fed or hungry. I can be content in that. You know why? Because he knows there were those times when he had had more than he ever needed. And he could be content with knowing that. A lot of us, a lot of times, bad attitudes exist because we nurse them, and good attitudes are absent because we don't nurse them. You realize when you got up this morning, if you were having a bad day, you had a choice whether it was going to be a bad day or if it was going to be a good day. You see, have you ever woke up and just been grumpy with yourself? I have. And I have to make a decision right then. God, am I going to just be somebody who keeps to myself all day? Or am I going to be somebody that's going to be the light of Jesus? As we mentioned before, we have 144 hours in a week's time. And to only give God 1 or 2 hours of those weeks, something else is going to vie for all the rest of that time. Is it right? So what are we going to do? Who are we going to let have control in our life? If we're going to really be content, we have to say, God, my contentment will come from within. Paul says this, doesn't he, in Philippians 4, verses 11 and 12. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. Remember, circumstances I have no control over. That's what he's saying. I have no control over circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret. Have you ever learned the secret? I've learned the secret, he says, of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. What about you? Have you learned the secret to contentment in your life? Or are you always thinking that there's something more that you're missing out on? If that's always going to be you, you'll be like Marilyn Monroe. Maybe you'll be like Snoopy. You remember Snoopy? Snoopy was Charlie Brown's dog. One Thanksgiving, Snoopy is there lying on his doghouse. You notice he never went in the doghouse. That's where he kept everything. He done all this sleeping and everything on the top of his doghouse. But Snoopy is lying there on top of his doghouse. He's all upset because everybody else is in the house and they're eating turkey and gravy and pumpkin pie and dressing and everything else that goes with their Thanksgiving dinner. And Snoopy's stuck there with dog food. And he's upset over that. And so he gets to thinking, well, I guess it could have been worse. I could have been born a turkey. You know? And sometimes we always just say, you know what, it could have been worse. Can't we? And if we ever get discontent, we can always look at whatever it is and say, you know what, it could have been worse. Here's what Paul did. He knew that he could not change his circumstances. He was locked up. He was in prison. There was no coming and going. There was nothing else. So he made the best with his attitude. The Bible says that he was full of joy. How can we be joyful in whatever circumstance? Paul says in this very epistle, he says, rejoice always. And then he doesn't just simply say that. He says, and again, I'll say, rejoice. I don't think being in prison is something to be happy about. But he did. He found a lot of happiness in it. Two youngsters were in a department store one day, and they come up to the section where it had, home items and things like that, and they see a set of bathroom scales. So one says, what is that? You know what it is? He says, I've seen one before. I don't really know what it is, but I think if you step on it, it'll make you mad. Because that's the way Mom and Dad get when they get on it. Paul knew he couldn't change his circumstances. But so he made the best out of every situation. Have you ever read about Paul's life? You ever read where Paul was telling us in his writings to the Corinthian church about the things that he went through, how many times he had been beaten, and how many times he had been shipwrecked, and how many times he had been flogged, and how he'd been left for dead. And you just go on and on and on. But he learned to make the best out of every situation. Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 14 says this. Now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. In other words, he had to stop and reflect. What's really taking place in my life? It has served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has been clear throughout the whole palace guard and everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. They can't say I stole anything. They can't say that I went around and robbed anyone, murdered anyone. The only reason I'm locked up here is because I've been preaching Jesus. And I'm in chains because of him, he says. Because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. They could have been sitting around there, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. I saw just last week one of our friends had posted on Facebook, as I keep up with, one of the guys I went to college with. And how many of you are familiar with SpongeBob? Most of you have probably at least heard or seen or something of SpongeBob. SpongeBob is kind of annoying, isn't he? I mean, he's a little yellow sponge. He lives down in Bikini Bottom. And SpongeBob kind of get annoying. Squidward, 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 Squidward. And he just repeats himself over and over and over again. Well, there's this drawing of Paul in prison. And he's in a Roman jail. And he's sitting there. And he's writing. And he's writing one of his prison epistles. And sitting there beside him, chained to the wall, is SpongeBob in jail. And SpongeBob's caption was this. What you doing, Paul? Writing a letter? What you doing, Paul? Writing a letter? What you doing, Paul? Writing a letter? You could know how SpongeBob would do. And so Paul writes this. 3 times I prayed to the Lord to remove this thorn in my flesh. Maybe you felt that way at times. But regardless, you learn to be content. Because what did that next little passage say following that? Because God responds, doesn't he? Not because SpongeBob was there with him, but there's things in your life that seem to be just a prick in you all the time. There's always a thorn in your flesh for whatever reason. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's spiritual, maybe it's emotional. And sometimes you say, God, just take it away. And God simply says what? My grace is sufficient for you. Why? Because you need to focus on me and not on that circumstance that's going on in your life. Where do you live? Do you live with him in the spiritual realm, or do you live in this physical world? There's the difference that you and I have to deal with on a daily basis, isn't it? We have to say, God, I'm with you. Regardless of where I'm at, I'm with you. We need to be content regardless of the circumstances. The circumstances do not change our standard.